Liberal MP Ken McDonald made waves this week when he said that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau should undergo a leadership review.
You go from a majority government to a minority government, there's supposed to be a leadership review. That hasn't happened.
You think at least there should be a leadership review in the Liberal Party?
Yes, let's clear the air. As a party, let's clear the air.
But today, McDonald tried to walk that back, writing in a statement, "The intent of my recent public comments was not to personally call for a leadership review, and I am not calling for one now. I will continue to support my caucus colleagues and the Prime Minister, as I've done since 2015. I'm joined now by the Government House Leader Steven MacKinnon. Mr. MacKinnon, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
I notice most of the MPs appear to be here for caucus except for Ken McDonald. His presence was felt, but physically he's not here. Is Ken McDonald still a Liberal in good standing with your caucus right now?
Oh yes, absolutely. You know, Ken's a colorful guy. Ken has a lot of opinions on a lot of things. He's one of the best hecklers in the House of Commons. We've always prided ourselves on having a diversity of views and a good, healthy exchange all the time.
He's supposed to heckle the other guys, though.
And he does.
But to say that, like, I know he's issued a statement clarifying that he didn't mean to call for a leadership review, though the plain meaning of the words he said on camera suggests that's what he's saying needed to be done. But he's also said that all governments have their best before date, and your government has hit your best before date. How is that going over with the caucus?
Well, the caucus meeting I just left, I've never seen more determination to get results for Canadians, to get things done. We have a very busy agenda coming up in the House of Commons this winter, this spring, and our determination is to get results for Canadians, to help with the cost of living, to confront climate change, to take on the issues of the day that people are concerned about. We understand that Canadians are experiencing high interest rates. We understand the groceries cost a lot of money. We understand that things are tough out there. But better days are ahead. We're looking down the field, I think, at some very promising economic statistics. I'd obviously let Chrystia Freeland talk more freely about that, but we are very confident as we go into this session that the lives of Canadians will be better, and Canada is so full of promise, David, and part of our meeting today was really to talk about that promise of Canada and the confidence that Canadians should have.
Okay, I want to talk about some of that, but just one more question about Mr. McDonald. Will there be any consequences for him? He has voted against this government a couple of times on things like on carbon tax when it comes to home heating, and now he's done this. Is there any consequence for him, or is he skate on this?
I don't believe so. I'm not the whip anymore. I was of late the whip. And I have no doubt that my successor, Ruby Sahota, has had conversations with Mr. McDonald, but Ken, as far as I'm aware, is a full-fledged member of the Liberal caucus.
Okay, someone who is about to leave the Liberal caucus is David Lametti, the former Justice Minister and Attorney General, who
Yes.
I think surprised a lot of people by announcing that he would be resigning effective January 31st. He says in his resignation letter and in a conversation he had with my colleague Catherine Cullen that it's been difficult since he left Cabinet to kind of find purpose as a Member of Parliament, is how I interpret his words. And he was never really given a clear explanation as to why he was demoted. I mean, what are your thoughts on the departure of David Lametti?
David Lametti is someone I consider to be a friend, someone who's made great contributions, helped us pass a lot of very good legislation, was a very good Attorney General, very good Justice Minister. He'll be a loss. A bilingual Montrealer and just a great soul, a great character. He's chosen to move into other pastures, and I have no doubt he'll make a great, significant contribution, but I also have no doubt that he'll be a very, very loyal and committed Liberal as we move forward as well.
It means another by-election, unless you're going to have a federal election within 6 months or so. On top of in Carolyn Bennett's old seat in Toronto, how many more of these do you think you might have? There have been people who were demoted from Cabinet, people getting maybe near the end of a political career. What kind of churn and turnover do you expect this year?
Look, the commitment that I witness in the Liberal caucus to get results for Canadians, I think speaks for itself and will continue to speak for itself as this session unfolds. Of course, there are people, in any normal organization, with 338 members of Parliament, you're going to see some turnover. Anyone who works in an organization that big or bigger knows that turnover is a normal thing. That will happen. We regret it when it happens with a member of our team, as we do in the case of Mr. Lametti. So undoubtedly there will be others, hopefully not very many others, but there's an exceptional team willing to tackle these big issues and go into this Parliament with a lot of confidence.
We saw the Prime Minister give a speech to caucus today where he talked about the affordability issues and the economic issues that you've outlined, and also with some pointed attacks on the Conservatives, and Mr. Poilievre in particular, on dealing with the affordability issues that are still plaguing Canadians, even though the inflation numbers have softened considerably from their peak. There's been a recognition by people in your own government you're too slow to get on this housing and on cost of living. What do you do now in the time you have left to make that situation easier for Canadians?
Well, what you're seeing is a daily focus on these issues and proposals put forward to the House of Commons. You know, I'm the government House Leader. We put forward these proposals all the time into the House of Commons. We voted for 30 hours straight on a series of measures and programs that will help Canadians today. But what do we get? Obstruction. We don't get alternatives. We don't get proposals from the other side. We get obstruction. So as we go into this session, we're going to keep putting those things to the House of Commons, which is the temple of our democracy. We're going to keep putting proposals on the table that will help Canadians in their everyday lives. And what I hope we get from the other side is a little more constructive criticism. We certainly expect criticism. We expect analysis, but obstruction, I don't think Canadians are going to stand for that.
Right, but I mean, that's the process inside Parliament. If you listen to what Mr. MacDonald had to say, if you look at public opinion numbers, there is an erosion in the public confidence in your government to be the people who can fix the things that are bothering them and hurting them. Why do you think confidence in your government has dropped so precipitously since last summer?
Look, if you look around the world, you know, we've had global supply chain issues. We have two major wars going on in the Middle East and in Europe. These are things that are unsettling to people. A climate crisis that is causing wildfires and floods, and indeed economic conditions, largely post-pandemic, a global pandemic. You see it in China, you see it in the United States, you see it in emerging economies, you see it throughout Europe. Governments, unfortunately, governments of the day, of all ideologies and political stripes, have trouble coping with tough economic conditions. We know that things are tough for Canadians. We understand that it costs more to put groceries in the fridge. We understand that rent costs more. We've put forward some concrete things to help deal with those. But you know, sometimes these things take effect in a large developed country like Canada, 40 million people. You know, some of these things aren't going to bite for the minute that you put them into place, but they are going to bite. Good policies have been implemented, will continue to be implemented. We will overcome these housing challenges. We will overcome inflation as a society. And I'm very, very confident about the outlook for Canada as we move ahead.
Do you have enough time? Do you have, like the runway, these things are slow, right? Houses take time. And I know you're not solely responsible for housing by any means, but you're bearing a lot of the political cost for the housing challenges. A lot of these things with the runway you have left and the economic forecast in that time period, it's not lining up necessarily as an easy path for you.
Elections, whenever they come, whenever the next one comes, will be a choice. Canadians will have a choice. We're going to be very confident about the solutions that we have put forward, that we're putting forward, and a vision of Canada. You know, what we're inviting people to do is listen to our opposition, listen to what Mr. Poilievre says, but also listen to what he doesn't say. You know, he says he'd cut a lot of spending. Where is that going to come from? Is it your child care? Is it the Canada Child Benefit? Is it climate change? Where exactly is it going to come from? He will say that it's this and that very minor thing that both of us know that wouldn't begin to solve the kind of problem that he describes. So we're going to put two competing visions on the table. We're very confident in the vision that we'll be putting forward. We're going to be calling out our opponents on the vision that they'll be putting forward, and we're very confident as we move ahead. Humble, but confident.
Just as a final point, because the Prime Minister started doing that in his speech today, he put much more of an aggressive focus on Pierre Poilievre than we have typically seen from the party leadership over the past year or so, and there has been frustration in your caucus that you've been too much on the defensive, not enough aggressiveness, and not enough attempts to define your main opponent. What we saw today, is that what we should expect going forward? And is this because the caucus was getting impatient with the lack of aggressiveness?
Look, Pierre Poilievre talks about Justin Trudeau as the author of every possible misfortune. You know, sleet is Justin Trudeau's fault. Indeed, I think it's important for us to be pointing out the contradictions in Mr. Poilievre's discourse, the contradictions that he puts forward, the implausibility, utter implausibility of any kind of fiscal plan that he will put forward. So Mr. Poilievre talks and talks and talks, doesn't propose anything. And we're going to be inviting Canadians to consider carefully what he says and what he doesn't say.
Steve MacKinnon, Government House Leader, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
But what we have to pay attention to, and what we do pay attention to, is bringing our communities' voices to here in Ottawa.
We don't need the Prime Minister to change. We need to change the Prime Minister. We need a common sense, conservative Prime Minister who will axe the tax to bring home lower prices.
But we have shown that we can use our power to get people help. We're not here to cut. We're here to build up programs that will lift up people.
Well, the federal parties are gearing up for the return of Parliament on Monday, with the Liberal caucus meeting in Ottawa today and the NDP wrapping up their caucus meeting in Edmonton. After more than a month away, what should we be watching for this winter sitting? I'm joined now by two former Chiefs of Staff to two former Prime Ministers. Tim Murphy was Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Paul Martin, and David McLaughlin was Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Brian Mulroney. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining me. Appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
So Tim, this was the week where the Liberals are going to do a bit of a reset, and then a federal court judge found that their use of the Emergency Act was unconstitutional. Ken McDonald said it was time to review the leadership of the Prime Minister, and today David Lametti quit. How do you think the reset's going?
Well, I think they have some things that started to go well and a few things that didn't. Look, unquestionably, one of the things that they have to kind of get behind them is the, as I think John Crosby once said, the nattering nabobs of negativism. And so they need to obviously have the team united and all speaking with one voice. And part of that involves, you know, creating a message and a narrative that they can all believe in, they all carry. I think you're starting to see some of that around the notion, and you heard the Prime Minister early in the week speak about trying to frame around spending cuts versus investments. I think they need to speak a bit to the, you know, more than they have to, you know, what's really happening out there around affordability and housing. You're starting to see some of that. And then I think the third element that the Liberals need to do is actually, and you're seeing some of this too, is go after the Conservatives who, you know, you saw Tucker Carlson in Alberta, you know, some of the MAGA stuff, and try to see to what extent they can, you know, pin the Conservatives with some of that. I mean, who are obviously having, you know, a very good run of it. Their numbers are excellent. And I think, to be honest with you, the person I would be most afraid for right now is Jagmeet Singh. I think the NDP have a problem of A, relevance, but B, of a really being squeezed between the two main parties.
I think nattering nabobs of negativism was Spiro Agnew, who was Nixon's first vice president.
Oh,
so
correct.
That didn't end too well for him. Crosby may have quoted him, but I think it came from Agnew. David, I mean, when you look at this dynamic, right, the Liberals kind of criticized in Charlottetown when they had their cabinet retreat of not having any big announcements. So they did have a more aggressive housing agenda throughout the fall. They had a few things this week, and a little bit more focus in their attack on Poilievre today when the Prime Minister spoke. Where do you think they are right now?
Really nowhere. I mean, in the sense that those are all, you know, I guess things that'll help. But really, let's look at what the Liberals have going for them. They have time, to the extent that they are not going to go for an early election, and Jagmeet Singh and the NDP will prop them up. So they have a year and a half, although that time is running out. The other thing they have going for them potentially, it looks like a likely improving economy. So the broader economic numbers underneath should be a bit better than that. But having said that, I don't really think this Liberal government has done much to advance its own message about itself as to why they should be reelected. And if they think that by just focusing on the other guys, I mean, there's always a contrast and a choice that happens in politics and campaigns, fair enough. But if they think that the Conservatives and Poilievre are going to implode, or somehow this MAGA stuff and the Trump kind of cloaking him with the Trump, label, and that is going to have an impact, I don't think it will. At the end of the day, this government suffers from a lack of focus. It suffers from an inability to be consistent on what it's focusing on, and it lacks a clarity of message that resonates with real people. And you just saw it in those clips. Bringing communities together. It's very up there, very ephemeral, very nice sounding, versus Mr. Poilievre, axe the tax, get rid of the Prime Minister, focusing on affordability and that kind of thing. That is still their core problem. And until they confront that, I think they're going to find themselves still well behind, not just behind, but well behind.
So, Tim, I'm not sure if you share that diagnosis in terms of a lack of focus, at least when it comes to messaging, but when your main messenger has become so unpopular over the past year, how much of a challenge is it to punch through? I mean, you can sharpen the message. You got to deliver, and you got to be seen as credible on delivering as well, right?
although I think there's a bit of overlap, because I don't disagree with David, actually. I think they've been a bit all over the place. I mean, partly because that's the nature of government. Events come at you and throw you off messaging, as we saw this week. The self-inflicted wounds should stop, however. But that being said, I do agree. I think that they have been searching for a way to connect with the issues and challenges voters have had. They started to do some of that around housing. I think, Fraser has done a pretty good job in terms of looking like there's action and things going. But I think part of the what we're seeing in the challenges around the Prime Minister's popularity comes with people not seeing him talk about what they're feeling in their daily lives, that anxiety around affordability, around housing, around kind of economic challenges looking forward. And I think there is room for improvement in the Prime Minister's popularity as he gets better at focusing on that, talking about that, communicating in the way that connects. And I do, I'm not sure I agree with David on one other point, which is I do think the compare and contrast continues to be important. And I think you saw that in that Abacus poll, right? Which said, the potential voter pool of people who are scared of a Poilievre government actually gets you up into the mid, potentially high 30s, which then suddenly changes the dynamic of a race. The problem is, I think the Liberals need to get themselves set up for that, but then there's an interesting opportunity created by that pool of people who are afraid of a Poilievre government. That being said, there's a significant pool on the other side, and then it comes down to a real ground war, riding by riding.
Right.
So, two observations in response to what Tim is saying. So, yes, I mean, surely you're going to do your contrast. I'm this versus the other guy, that no question. But my point is relying on that, either exclusively or too much on that, I think will not serve the Liberals well. They still need to have the positive message about what do they get. Why does it matter to have Prime Minister Justin Trudeau? Why does it matter to still have the Liberals in government? Until they can make that case, it really won't work to just do the negative contrast. We saw that in Manitoba. The PC government there ran a negative campaign against Wab Kinew and the NDP, basically saying he's a risk. It doesn't actually translate. The second part is time is also in Mr. Poilievre's favor, in that the more that Mr. Poilievre is out there and leading in that, the fear of him will dissipate. And so there's a chance, surely the Liberals will try to bring it back, but I'm betting that it'll be less effective later on, in part because they squandered that early opportunity to define Mr. Poilievre when they had that chance. It's just that much harder now.
Yeah, it's something that I talked about that with Steve MacKinnon. You hear this from backbenchers, you hear this from Liberal operatives, like, why have we waited so long, is what they say. But Tim, I want to go back to what you said. Jagmeet Singh, you think, is in the weakest position, or maybe the most vulnerable position here. Yeah. When you speak to Liberals how they see a path back, they know they've kind of lost male voters in a big way, maybe to the point that they can't get them back in critical mass. They think women, young people, that's their shot, but to force...
Gotta get seniors back.
But to force progressives to make a choice. And that is where they see the potential. And that would squeeze out, should it work, as you say, the NDP potentially here.
I think but I'm highlighting because actually there's a double threat to the NDP. And we saw a bit of that playing out in Ontario, where Conservatives peeled away part of that working class base of the NDP in ridings that they hadn't been competitive in a long time. And so what you could and you see, to be fair to Poilievre, he's working language and issues that are having some appeal to that community. And that have voted NDP, and their switch vote is actually not Liberal, but Conservative. And so you could actually have this squeeze between progressives and activists who are more concerned about what a Poilievre government would do. And then on the other side, voters who say, well, Poilievre's speaking the language and the issues that matter to me, and suddenly you're squeezed out of both sides. And that's, I've lived that, seen it happen. It happened to the Liberals when Jack Layton was in power, and it happened provincially in Ontario in 2018.
It happened to me in the Kim Campbell bus in 1993. I mean, I can tell you that.
It's not fun.
Well, it's not. Look, I wouldn't recommend it.
Not to pick at your old wounds, David, but I do want to ask, right? Because you did work for Prime Minister Mulroney, and I'm not disparaging Prime Minister, tremendously successful career, but at the end, it was clear he felt it was time for him to go.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right? So how do you know when you've reached that point? Because, Ken McDonald talked about this, and he's only one MP doing it, but he's not the only Liberal saying this.
No.
How do you know? And how do you convince a Prime Minister that it is time, if it is time, for them to leave?
They have to convince themselves. At the end of the day, it is such an ultimately a personal decision, and it is hard to give up. But if you have a broader perspective about why I'm here and why I'm doing this, and for the party, for the country, at a certain point you just recognize you have a best before date. Mr. Trudeau has an uphill battle, no question, with the image that he has and the baggage that he now carries. The fact that there isn't an obvious successor is not a solution for him staying, if you will. He is still going to have to work through it. And so, okay, what are you doing to convince Canadians that I am still up for the job and I can convince you back on my side? Then you have to look at what is his behavior, what is he talking about, vacations, other kinds of things there. So, ultimately it is a personal thing, but and he's probably hearing some of it. He's not. You can't be, completely non-sentient to what's happening around you in politics. So, but it's very hard, short of a palace coup or a putsch in the cabinet, or something like that, a very British coup, if you will, to do it in the way that they do it in the UK Conservative Party. But he's going to have to decide that on his own. So far, there's no evidence that they will. But on the other hand, he probably shouldn't telegraph it. The moment he opens the door, it's over, exactly.
So Tim, just as a final point, speaking of palace coups, there is no Paul Martin to his Jean Chrétien. So what do you think happens here? I mean, the Prime Minister says he's staying. The people around him say he's staying. I see no evidence he's leaving, no matter how many people suggest that it should happen. What's your prediction on what happens with the leadership of the Liberal Party between now and the next election?
He's staying and he's running again.
All right.
I think it is. I agree with David. It's a personal decision. People I know who, talk to him and then, personally, honestly about those kind of issues are telling me he's in it. He thinks he has a path to win and he's going to pursue it.
Okay. Guys, I always appreciate the insight. Tim Murphy, David McLaughlin, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you.